What's up, gamers? I'm your host, Cobra, and this is the Freeroll. On today's edition, we've got Fableborne pre-alpha gameplay to break down. This past weekend, the Fableborne team released their pre-alpha demo to the community and a handful of content creators. I was lucky enough to be selected as one of the content creators who was given access to the pre-alpha demo and able to be one of the first to play the game Fableborne. That was a lot of fun. Now, what is Fableborne? Fableborne is a mobile game that is a combination of an action RPG and a base builder. So essentially, you're going to have a couple of different modes. You will have a base that you maintain and upgrade over time yourself, and then you're also going to have heroes that you can use to go on raids and raid against either environment type dungeons, which is what we're doing today, or against other players' bases in the future, which will be a lot of fun. There's also going to be a league mode, and it's important to note that the game is entirely free to play. The combination of free to play and mobile is a real bullseye in my opinion. That gives you the foundation to building a full game economy that can actually drive some Web3 earnings as well. So as we jump into the gameplay demo itself, a couple of things that are important to note. Just like any other gameplay demo, this is considered pre-alpha, which means it is early in the development, and the expectation should be that this is not going to be perfect or even close to perfect, that there's going to be all sorts of bugs and issues that we run into, and a big reason for conducting this test is to get that feedback so that the developers can find and squash those bugs. Now, that said, this ran really smoothly for me, and I didn't run into very many issues at all. In fact, the couple of points of feedback that I'm going to give, I'm not even sure are broken. They just might need to be things that are cleaned up a little bit, but are otherwise working as intended. I also think it's important to note that I conducted this test on my brand new iPhone 14 Pro Max. That's a pretty high-end phone, and it's less than a month old since it was released. So if any hardware is going to run this game well, it should be my new phone. I mentioned that one of the limitations is that we only have 2 heroes to choose from, but luckily those heroes provided 2 different gameplay types, which was certainly enjoyable. The first hero is Avi, who is a wind element archer. Avi is more of the aggro character. He has less health, but more damage and a little bit more speed. Kiara, on the other hand, is a water element mage. She's more of a control character. She has more health, less damage, and a little bit slower. But instead of having all attack abilities, she has a variety of abilities that allow her to control the environment and hordes of enemies in different ways than Avi. Now, my personal preference was a strong preference towards Kiara. Not a big surprise, I tend to like magic users the most, although I do often enjoy playing as archers as well. Avi did have a very cool ability in that he could still attack with his basic attack while moving. That includes backing up or sidestepping, which was really useful for taking out enemies. As with Kiara, often had to retreat a little bit, attack, retreat a little bit, attack, in order to keep her clean, because she doesn't really have much way to defend herself otherwise. The reason why I preferred Kiara so much, though, is those control spells are a lot of fun to use and made dealing with the variety of raids a bit easier for me. The big reason there is that her ultimate ability is a large AoE freeze attack. It does damage to everybody that it hits, although not a ton of damage. And more importantly, it freezes everything that it hits for a few seconds. Now this is really important because there's all sorts of sections in these raids that are more difficult, and they're more difficult because they have many different defense units or enemy units in the same section all going after you. And with the AoE freeze attack, you can freeze them all. Now, you're not going to be able to clear out all of them because it doesn't do a ton of damage, but it does allow you to pick off 1 or 2 strategic points and then retreat and come back and handle that area with a little bit more gusto the second time around. It's definitely a slower play type, but none of these raids take more than 5 minutes anyways, and while you might struggle to clear some of the more difficult ones with Kiara, especially if you're playing very defensively and carefully, it's not necessary that you clear out every single enemy or enemy unit in order to beat a stage. As you're watching the gameplay behind me, you're going to notice that when I'm playing as Kiara, I regularly found myself using her teleport ability, whereas when I was playing as Abby, I was not using the multi-arrow shot ability nearly as much. Now, part of that is simply that I got a little bit better and more familiar with playing with Kiara because she was my preferred hero, but I also found that it really allowed for a different style of play because I could instantly jump a handful of feet in one direction. That made it quite a bit easier to dodge some of the bigger attacks from defense units, and it also allowed me to approach some of the enemies a little bit differently. Now, the 15 raids that they provided us to play this weekend scaled in difficulty, with the first being very easy and the 15th one being a little bit more difficult. There are essentially 2 different enemy types. I'm calling the regular enemies the ones that are mobile, the goblins or bats or bugs that were running around and could actually attack you, and then defense units. And this is stationary defenses like a freeze tower or the earthquake tower or the large crossbow that would shoot at you. Now, dealing with the various enemies, whether it was a defense unit or an enemy type, none of them were difficult at all. However, the difficulty comes from the volume that they throw at you at a given time, and when you've got half a dozen or 12 plus different enemies and defense units all within the same range and attacking you at the same time, things get a lot more difficult, and you actually need a strategy in place to clear them out. If you just rush in to that many enemies and start firing away, you're not going to last very long. I found the toughest enemy unit to be the exploding bug. Now, these don't appear until somewhere around raid 9 or 10, I believe. And individually, again, they're not terribly difficult. They move around in a strange way, and they don't do a ton of damage, except they are self-destructing, and the self-destructing explosion does a ton of damage. Now, I had a bit of trouble for a couple of reasons. One, they add these enemy types in when you get to the raids that are a lot more involved. So if you overlook one of these bugs and it hits you with its kamikaze attack, then you're in a little bit of trouble for sure, because that's going to take a big chunk of your health bar. The other reason why I found them difficult was that dodging out of their small AoE explosion attack was a bit more tricky than most of the other dodging mechanics that I found in the game. I was playing with Kiara most of the time and frequently would trigger their self-destruct by getting close to them and then use the teleport to get out of there. I regularly would still get hit though, so I'm not sure if that's working as intended. There doesn't appear to be any iframes or invincibility frames when you're in the teleport. That's typical in most games when you're doing any sort of teleport move or dodge move, that at least for a split second, it'll be impossible for you to take any damage as long as you have timed it properly. It's entirely possible that my timing has been off, and with only a couple of days to play the game, that's probably the case. But it also seemed to me that the area of effect for that explosion was just a bit too small compared to what it was actually hitting. So some potential feedback there is, if that's working as intended, maybe we make that circle a little bit larger to show the area that you need to dodge out of a little bit more clearly, or potentially the attack is extending beyond the circle and is not as intended, and that just needs to be adjusted down. Either way, I do think that's one spot that can be improved upon for the next release. The toughest defense unit, on the other hand, in my opinion, was definitely the Freeze Tower. Now, the reason why is because the Freeze Tower caused a lot of trouble. Unlike the crossbow, it could continue to aim its ice beam at you as you're dodging and during its attack. Once the crossbow locks on, it has its path and you can just move right out of it. It's much easier to dodge. However, the Freeze Tower ice beam is continuous for a handful of seconds, and it continues to try and track you. There's no way to go under it or behind it. You can only run away and or try to dodge behind like a large boulder to give yourself some cover. But that's not necessarily the tricky part. The tricky part is that the freeze beam itself doesn't do very much damage, but it does freeze you for a few seconds. And they would always put these next to a bunch of other high damage enemies or defense units, so that when you get frozen, you're taking a bunch of damage from multiple attacks. And this could really change a raid round really, really quickly. You could make one mistake, get frozen, get hit by an exploding bug and a arrow from a crossbow, plus a couple of goblin attacks, and all of a sudden you've lost 50, 60, 70% of your HP bar in just a couple of seconds, which can be difficult to overcome. Now, I mentioned that this playtest demo was limited in nature and that they were only testing the core feature of raiding with a couple of different characters. So what can we expect with future updates to Fableborne that we don't see here today? The big feature is the base builder game mode, and that is almost an entirely different game. So it'll be really interesting to see when that rolls out and we get our chance to put our hands on that particular game mode. That's the biggest piece that's missing. There's also going to be a whole bunch of other characters, not just 2 of them. So it'll be interesting to see how many we have at the start and how many we can potentially unlock by progressing in the game. There's also no revenge mechanic, no leaderboard, no Shadowlands map and exploration, and notably, there's no blockchain or NFT integration today. Now, that last part sounds like a big miss, but in my opinion, that is the correct way to approach game development. The Web3 portions are very important and definitely will help differentiate the game and the project. However, there's no need to test it at this point. It is much more important and foundational that the game is functional and fun to play. And so that is what we were testing out now. And I can report back that I had a lot of fun playing Fableborne. My expectations were somewhere in the middle, but they definitely over-delivered. The game itself was fun, it was smooth, and I am, for one, looking forward to the demo opening back up this coming weekend, and even more excited for future updates to Fableborne. Now, comparing different projects' playtest demos to each other is a bit foolish in my opinion, because in every case we are testing out incomplete games, and there's a large variety of game types out there, and so naturally you're going to enjoy the game types that fit your natural taste preferences much better than the ones that do not. There's a reason why you've seen a whole bunch of action RPG on the Freeroll, and you haven't seen very many first-person shooters. That said, I can only give the Fableborne team positive feedback because we downloaded the game without any issues. We played it all weekend long and had a lot of fun. That is the real key. I am actively looking forward to additional updates to the game and testing out additional features in the future, and that's what we are looking for from these playtest demos. The people who touch it and play it should be enjoying themselves and looking forward to playing more. They should also want to tell their friends about it so that they can jump in and play the next time that it comes around as well. So with that in mind, I have linked below the application for next weekend's playtest demo. They intend to open it up to a much wider audience. I don't know if it's going to be everybody that applies or just increasing it to say 100 or 200 players, but either way, This is your next great chance to get your hands on the game, and if you want to check out Fableborne, definitely fill out that application and join the Discord. And that wraps up today's edition of the free roll on Fableborne's pre-alpha gameplay demo. I hope you found this informative and entertaining, and if you did, consider giving us a follow on Twitter. It's where I love to engage with the Web3 gaming community and answer all of your questions. Also, do me a favor and double check that you've hit that like and subscribe button below. It really helps to support the channel.